Wrestling with God, episode number 16.
Oh, I turn my headphones up, man. Take off your Bluetooth. We about to take it past the roof. Wrestling with God to find the truth. It's so mind-blowing and the facts are bulletproof. Tune in and connect direct, cause this sets demand respect. We ain't even tripping, the most intriguing podcast on iTunes. Flow with the word like a balloon. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back to another episode of the Wrestling with God podcast. I'm Scott Blair, your host, and this is our 16th episode, Sweet 16. So I guess this is the one where I get my driver's license. I do feel like I'm finding my voice a little better and actually having the type of conversations that I set out to have when creating this podcast idea. So maybe I should get some type of permit. I don't know. It's been a big change since the first several episodes for sure, where I was really struggling at learning this podcast stuff. But look at you, Grapplers Church fam. You have stayed with me through the bad episodes. No bad guests, just bad interviewing skills by me, I guess. But we are getting better, and the best is yet to come. That I am certain of. But I am very grateful that you keep coming back, that you keep sharing it with others. And if you haven't left a review yet, please do so on iTunes. It only takes a minute, but it really helps the show get more exposure to a greater audience. And you probably came here to listen to the story today about my guest and his book. So by leaving a review, you are helping more people discover him and his book. So go do it, please, and get behind him. And speaking of books, I also want to thank all of you so much for purchasing the Wrestling with God book on Amazon Kindle. You helped it reach number 1. Thank you so kind, studio audience. Big thank you also to the Church Planning Podcast for having me on their show last week and interviewing me about the book as well. I love that podcast. It was an honor to be on with those guys. Go listen to that episode if you would. And if you haven't listened to the podcast itself, I suggest you check it out. And if you haven't gotten the book, please stop by Amazon, search in the Kindle store for the title Wrestling with God by Scott Blair, and download your copy today. Greatly appreciated. And our sponsor for today's show is actually another show from across the pond, from the UK. This show also interviews people, and I've been listening to it, and it is very powerful. And you guys know the Word of God says that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And this show, the Beauty for Ashes talk show with Sade Popula, is all about testimonies of salvation. And I'm telling you, you hear some really incredible and unique stories on this show. It's just very inspiring. So go check out the Beauty for Ashes talk show. Turn it on, sit back, relax like you do when you listen to this show, and find out how each of her guests came to salvation. You can watch it on www.beautyforashestalkshow.tv. What a great idea for a show. Thank you so much for sponsoring this show, Sade. God bless everything that you guys are doing over there, your work. You're doing wonderful things. It's very encouraging and very exciting. And speaking of exciting, today's show is part 2 of my interview with Tony the Beat Poet Kriz. And we just continue where we left off last time, talking about his book, Neighbors and Wise Men, Sacred Encounters in a Portland Pub and Other Unexpected Places. Now, you guys know I have raved and raved about this book, but so have a lot of other people. I was looking today, and I see on Amazon that it has earned a 4.5 star, almost a perfect 5-star rating with almost 100 reviews on Amazon. That is impressive. So don't just take my word for it, how great the book is. Go and read on Amazon what everyone else is saying. And you know what? You know what I would like to see for an Amazon review? A big fat 5-star review that says, I discovered about Tony and this book on the Wrestling with God podcast. Or if you don't want to leave the review, shoot him an email and just let him know that the same thing. You found out about him on the podcast. I just want to know that we've truly been a blessing through this guy and that this show has served him well in a good way. So I won't keep you any longer, Grapplers Church fam. Let's grab a hold of God and not let go. Welcome back to the show, Tony. So are you ready to continue with Wrestling with God?
I'm ready.
All right. We'll just start where we left off at part 1. And the next comment I had was actually on page 94. And you got to talking about Trainer John a little bit.
Okay.
And one of the paragraphs there says that after your roller coaster few years, you went from a triumphant Christian missionary with the sort of spiritual confidence that would made him proud to a defeated doubter with a dead soul. And then you begin to talk about the wrestling with kind of maybe the ideology that he had placed on you. So according to the once saved, always saved paradigm, he couldn't say that you were lost. Would he say that you had never been truly a Christian? Because, you know, a lot of people will use that argument. Had they truly been one of us, they wouldn't have left. And you kind of ended it with saying that the last couple of years were irrefutable evidence of that fact. You had violently wavered, actually, is what you said. And I think that's a great topic for us to continue on. And I know kind of we've beat this to death, but I think it's why the book resonated with me so much. It's this spiritual bankruptcy is how you kind of coined it in the first part of this interview. So for people who are listening, and I know a lot of us have dealt with this or are dealing with it, we find ourselves in a place that we violently wavered, but we're still wrestling with God. We're still wrestling with these things, but we've got one person in our ear saying, you know, once saved, always saved. We've got somebody else saying, well, had you truly been saved, you wouldn't have been acting like this or wavering. And what kind of advice would you kind of dig a little deeper, narrow down on that, somebody who's struggling with that?
Yeah, just to back up a little bit. So the book, Neighbors and Wiseman's travelogue of sorts, a memoir of how people outside of Christianity have taught me the gospel of Jesus. So it's got, you know, Muslims and Buddhists and Jews and atheists all through it, who have been friends of mine, have been really dear to me. And then the chapter you're talking about is sort of juxtapositioning Trainer John, who was, when I was in ministry with a parachurch organization, he was one of my sort of leaders, and him to this old, flamboyant Jewish woman that I met, and sort of their two ways of thinking about faith. Yeah, I was certainly raised in this concept that there was nothing more important. This was the phrase I was taught. There's nothing more important than being able to say you're 100% sure that you're saved. Like, that phrase was essential. Matter of fact, it was more important than being able to say that, you know, I know I love God, or I know God loves me, or something like that. And during that season of sort of defeat overseas, when I was living as a Christian missionary, I certainly couldn't say 100%. Matter of fact, I got to the point that I didn't really have the capacity to even ask myself the question anymore. You know, are you saved? I was like, because my heart had died to a point where the question didn't even have meaning anymore, because God had become so unimaginable and so distant, and my soul had become so disconnected in the time. And I think part of the challenge around these questions is the once saved, always saved doesn't leave room for the dynamics of faith. That faith is, in fact, something that is a drama that's playing out in our lives. You know, just the same way my relationship with my wife is dramatic, often very dramatic, you know. And there are times where, you know, there's nothing more sure in my heart than the fact that my wife and I are eternally in love with each other, and that'll never be broken. And there are times, like yesterday, where I sincerely doubt, like, whether or not I even like this person. And that's just reality. And where's the space for that? And then the funny thing is, I go back into my Bible and I read David wrestling with his faith all the time, and doubt and issues. And Moses has the guts to write the Torah in such a way where he comes out looking like an idiot half the time, and the people of Israel look like idiots half the time, and he's okay with it. Like, that's how he's going to write the story. And when Peter tells his story through John Mark in the Gospel of Mark, Peter comes out looking like a dork who's doubts and struggles and second guesses and makes mistakes. And when Paul writes his story, he's struggling along the way, and when he tells the story to Luke, he's getting in massive conflict with Barnabas and Mark, and they're breaking up with one another. And book of Galatians, Paul and Peter struggle with one another. Peter's all wrapped up in a false gospel that's dependent upon the law, and it's like these guys seem to be struggling with this stuff all the time. Like, why wasn't I presented with a faith that was consistent with my Bible? But I wasn't. I wasn't given those same dynamics as a kid growing up in a Baptist church. And so when I did start to doubt or to have questions or to feel like I wasn't spiritually strong, the only category I was left with was therefore that I was somehow broken. I was somehow not pleasing to God or not spiritually significant anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's a real shame that we sort of give people only sort of two ends of a spectrum with no space in between to be in the drama of faith.
It's great that you said it. I'm glad you put it in that marriage context as well, because if it is a personal relationship, that coined phrase that we like to use as believers, that we have a personal relationship with Jesus. And, if we go to a marriage counselor, a pastor who's a marriage counselor, and you say, this last month, I can't even stand my spouse.
Right.
They're going to tell you, and I'm not sure I want to be in this thing anymore, and this is going to be the death of me. And they're going to say, hey, that's part of marriage.
Right.
And but if we went to that same pastor outside of a marriage counseling session and said, I don't even think I like the idea of this God that you're preaching this last month, and I'm not sure I want to stay in this, then you would probably get, in a lot of cases, a much different response from the same pastor.
Right. Nothing's a red flag for me more than when people try and explain to me how they never have conflict with their spouse. Like when I counsel people, like, we're great. Like we never have conflict. We've just worked through things. And I'm always like, really? And then when you press below the surface, I find out that usually they don't have kids when they say that. And usually they're basically roommates. Like they have their own lives. They have their own careers. They just basically are dating and they happen to live under the same roof. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't want that. That doesn't sound like marriage to me.
Right.
It's because it's a very sort of self-serving paradigm. Or the other time that I hear it is when, quite frankly, one member of the relationship is totally subservient to the other one, and they just have a power structure that's so rigid that one never has the right to express themselves, and the other one always has the right to express themselves. And that's another place. I'm like, I don't want that either, But sure. In a marriage of real sort of exchange, man, conflict happens, and there is dynamics, and there are weeks I don't like my wife at all.
Sure. Well, to continue on the point, you kind of revisited what the idea behind the book was, and it's God speaking to you through these unlikely places. And that kind of touches on the next 2 points that I had marked in the book. Chapter 12 starts off, you talk about the conduits of that healing were going to come from places I could not control or predict. And then a little further in, you talk a little bit about your upbringing and how that culture and your father and your church and your mentors and all those things had kind of contaminated your faith, had put a lens on it that you were seeing it just through one way. So, I listened to your story, and I know that you've traveled overseas and you've lived with a Muslim family, and you've been to read, and you've subjected yourself to sitting in a bar doing your theology homework and getting to know these other people. And now you even continue to open up your home, and you have people from various faiths that spend time with you and come to your Sunday dinners and so on. And I know that has really lifted and expanded to the paradigms that you have and allow you to see things through another side, another lens, I guess. And, I've had some of the same experience. I've been in ministry, I've lost ministry, I've lived overseas, and I've exposed myself to a lot. I've traveled to 14 countries. And I know that these things have all benefited me in the long run. But I guess how do we deal with people, or how do we lead people or encourage people who have been raised in the Bible Belt and in a family whose paradigms are very strict and set?
Yeah.
and they haven't had the experiences to travel. They've never had a Muslim friend or a gay friend
Right.
or an atheist friend. You know, they've spent their life in this cultural silo and surrounded themselves with people who think like them. I find that challenging. I don't know, do I leave these people to themselves for God to break them, or is there a way we can prod them or encourage them?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times when I travel and speak, I have people come up to me just asking that very thing. They're like, you know what, if I'm really honest, I don't have any like non-Christian friends. At least not people that I'm really talking about life with. And you know, part of what I try and express is it's more than just sort of having friends of other faiths that you talk about sports with, or that you talk, when you do talk about faith or beliefs or whatever, that it's genuine exchange. It's like genuine sitting and listening to one another and learning from one another. And they're just like, that's never happened. So what I do is one thing I do is I tell a lot of stories. Everywhere I go, I tell stories about my friends. I'm writing an article right now that I'm probably going to call Magi. That's about one of my really, really, really good atheist progressive friends, who's one of my best spiritual friends right now. Like we talk about Jesus constantly, right? So I'm just going to tell that story as part of this article for Leadership Journal. And so that's one thing I do is I tell a lot of stories, trying to stimulate people to believe in something different. And then I tell people that they got to restructure their lives. We have to get away from our religious addictions, where my entire life is structured around sort of religious networks. It's really bizarre. And I would argue it's an affront to the book of Acts, the way that we live often. You know, I've got to have Christian business associations and Christian luncheons that I go to and play on a church softball league. I mean, what could be better than playing softball with people who believe differently than I do? But no, I'll only play softball on a church softball league. Like, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, softball inherently is a great place to just go and be with people who are different than you are, and people don't have a concept of that. And when you play softball in a non-church softball league, go out afterwards and get a beer, get a Coke, and hang out and just chat with people. Become friends. You know, so we have to restructure. And then another piece that's really hard for a lot of religious folks to get their brains around is that God doesn't need them to kind of accomplish his work in the world. God delights in like having us sort of tag along. I like to say that when it comes to evangelism, God is the superhero and I'm the sidekick. And the job of the sidekick most of the time is comic relief. Like I'm the sidekick. Like, superhero doesn't need me to come along for the thing, but superhero seems to like me to be in the room, just hanging out. That's great. So God doesn't need me to sort of like force the conversation or turn the conversation or make sure that the quote-unquote truth is delivered. Now, I'm going to deliver an awful lot of truth because I'm going to be honest about my life, but some of my responsibility is sort of like twist the conversation in some way. So therefore, if I go into a conversation with somebody who believes very differently than I do, and I ask them questions about what they believe, what they think, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what their value system is, how they got to that value system, and if all I do for 2 hours is just listen, you know, with that sort of like look of wonder in my eyes because this person is sharing their life with me, and if I never get a chance to turn the conversation and tell them my side of the story, it's still a wonderfully successful conversation in the kingdom of God. It's a beautiful, beautiful exchange just to sit and listen. And the gift of another person's story being told is such a gift. So one of the reasons I wrote Neighbors and Wise Men is because I'm tired of Christian books where the author is the hero of every chapter. Let me tell you how I was the smart person in the scene. You read Neighbors and Wise Men, I'm the idiot in every scene, right? I'm totally the sidekick. Like, the other person, whoever they are, whatever background they come from, they're the hero. And I'm like, this is so great that you would share your life with me in this way. So that's part of what I wanted to communicate through that book.
And you did very well.
Oh, thanks.
The next item I have marked here is like on page 138, and it talks about, and this was your time at Reed.
Oh, yeah.
And they wanted authenticity, not hypocrisy. And the line I actually marked was, they want faith that leads to activism, not institutionalism. And I think that's much more widespread among this younger generation that's coming up than it has been in previous generations. And I don't know if I shared this story the last time or not, but quickly, when I arrived on the mission field in Brazil, I went to a place downtown where they were to find street kids to work with. And there was a plaza down there that was where it was notorious for all the street kids to be there huffing their drugs and pickpocketing tourists and different things. And I ended up running into some missionaries from North Carolina, and these guys were like 20-year-old guys, hair braided, jeans sagging, tattoos, and they looked like they could have almost been street kids themselves. And they were a cultural shock for me from a Christian viewpoint. But after spending time with them, these young men were sometimes sleeping out on this plaza with the kids, putting their lives in danger, living in some pretty poor circumstances themselves compared to what they came from. And it started a real conflict in my head because I knew that there were elders and lifelong Christians and different people that were sitting back at my home church in suits and ties on the front row every Sunday who knew the Bible inside and out that would have bad things to say about these young men because of the way they dressed, lived, talked, act, looked, etc. And these guys didn't have a lot of scriptural knowledge, but they also, it caused a conflict because these guys loved God so much and loved these kids so much, they were putting their lives on the line and were out there living the gospel in a way I'd never seen done before. And it really opened up a can of worms for me because I was having a hard time processing it and deciding who I wanted to be more like. It was one of the first things that really prodded me in that. And so I agree. I think that this generation, this younger generation that's coming up, is going to be more geared like that. They're going to want something that they can actually walk out and live out and not just be institutionalized in.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, that group of elders you talk about in the front row, that's probably a blind spot for them, but we all have blind spots, you know, areas of faith that we can't see clearly. I'm pretty hesitant to want to knock down other people's blind spots because it just usually reveals my own in the process. But I'm with you. I mean, up here in Portland, post-Christian city, I live in a very post-Christian neighborhood. The churches that are being planted in Portland, you know, they look pretty different often than like the church I was raised in, or a lot of the churches that I visit around the country. And one of the sort of key common denominators is this sort of renewed sense of activism. There's a church that's not far from here, planted by a couple friends of mine, and it's almost entirely a church of street kids. And they do church every Sunday. There's a sermon, there's music. I mean, it's raucous. It's raucous music. I mean, obnoxiously raucous because there are kids playing on 5-gallon pickle tubs during the worship, and everybody's encouraged to grab instruments and play in the room. So it's obnoxious, and there's a big pile of food in the corner that they get from grocery stores, and the day-old bread and day-old vegetables, and everybody who comes walks away with a big old pile of food, and somebody preaches the gospel, but in language and using specific terms, curse words that a lot of people would be very uncomfortable with, but that's the culture, what's going on. And they got 100 people in the room every Sunday morning, and it's not. I mean, these are young people. These are both sort of quote unquote pastors, and all the kids who come to it are all 20 and 25 and living on the streets, and you know they've got 24 dogs parked outside because they've all got pit bulls, and you know why street kids have dogs? I mean, a lot of people think it's for protection. That's part of it. For companionship, yes, but the main reason is it's a sleeping bag you don't have to carry because the dog stays warm at night.
Warmth,
and when you're cold, you need something to cuddle up with, and that's why street kids keep dogs, And
yeah, I believe that. I
mean, this is what our kids are going through, man. I mean, it's unbelievable.
The next point that I want to read from the book, I got to tell you, man, it was wow, the way it hit me. It's hard to express, and I can't remember if this is what my mind went to or if this was actually what was on the news when I read it. I think it was on the news. But there was a guy, I want to say it was in Michigan, and they found out he had a woman or two held captive in his house, and this was just a few months back. She'd been in there for years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, at least one of the women had been in there for years. Man, I was watching on the news, and they were really painting this guy out to be a monster, and I could feel my rage towards him, and just what a sick person and everything, but I was reading your book, and you got to this "We Believe" chorus that you wrote out. And the next to last one said, "We believe in faith that is for the beaten as well as the abuser."
Yeah.
And I had to stop and step back, and it really upset me. It was a hard pill for me to swallow because, again, I see myself most of the time, and a lot of times I have this tendency to see myself as maybe the good guy or the hero in the story, and I forget about all my faults and all that God puts up with. And I started thinking about that story, and I started thinking, faith for the victims, but for the abuser too. And I started thinking about, could I extend mercy and grace towards this man? And then it took the thought even deeper, what kind of hellish childhood did he have to go through, probably, to turn out to be such a monster?
Yeah.
And it was just a really challenging point for me, and it really made me think. I want to thank you so much for putting that in the book. It was painful to look at because still have the tendency to place myself on a pedestal,
right?
And but what kind of monster really am I in God's eyes? With all my sin, but yet He's extended grace and mercy for me. So I found that unbelievably challenging in the book.
It's great. Yeah, there's a lot there to explore. I think the church needs to return to exploring because we can't back to this good guy, bad guy paradigm. God's team and everybody else kind of thing. And
yeah,
I think the extent of, I think we need to get back to some good depravity conversations. And not that we don't talk about the great grace that's been bestowed upon us, the forgiveness that we experience, but the ways that I contribute every day to systemic evil, the ways that I contribute, there's textile industry, sugar industry, coffee industry, cocoa industry. Like almost any time you interact with those four industries, you're contributing to slavery. I'm contributing to slavery. This is part of my legacy, So there are very, very tangible ways that I'm contributing to the pain of my world. So, and then you and I, as white males, but not just white males, white males, educated, North American, both of us fairly large of stature, the entire world bends to us. It bends to us. Opportunity bends to us. Power and authority and people deferring to us. It just happens every time I step outside my door. And how am I processing those systems of oppression, those systems, and my contribution to them? And then, as you were saying, then once I identify that in myself, then what do I do when I look at the world around me? And me being sort of a justice guy who has a lot of rage towards the bad people in the world, do I have pity towards them? Like, the story in the book about John Perkins. Do I have pity? Because in fact, we are all the same.
As a professional friend to pastors, I want to get your take on something here.
All right.
You talk a lot about in that same chapter how the church has been divided over their need to brand their work.
Oh yeah. And
how we got to have our name on the homeless ministry and on every marquee, etc. And actually, the man I consider to be the main mentor in my life, one time we were walking through the church parking lot of a church he was visiting, and one of the ministries had the minister's name on it, on like their bus or whatever. So, John Smith Ministries International or something.
Right.
In a very subtle way, and he wasn't trying to knock the guy or anything, but I think he was trying to get me to think about something. But he just, in pleasant conversation, we just kind of gleam over, and he makes a remark, watch out when they start putting their name on it. And he kind of just grinned, and we continued walking and changed the subject. But I chewed on a lot of nuggets he gave me over the years.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of want to get your take on that. When you're talking with your friends and pastors in that community, how is it that you kind of maybe warn them or advise them on that if you see that trend starting to have that, they want to do something, but they're not willing to partner because they kind of got to put their church's name on it or brand it, or I don't know. What do you think really gets behind that? Because I know people that are really, this is my point I'm getting to. I know people that are really big-hearted, love God, want to do a lot, to help other people, but you still can't get them to work with the church down the street, and it frustrates me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a couple issues going on there. that one is, again, it's this, I think it's like needing to control the dialogue or something, but like we need to make sure that everybody knows sort of that Jesus people are the ones that are doing these acts of mercy and kindness, as opposed to just letting our presence as people of faith be sort of the reality of the gospel. Mm-hmm. So there's that piece of it. People observing are too dumb to sort of figure out what's going on, and so we have to sort of force the dialogue down their throats or something. But I think, honestly, a lot of it is just ego. You know, it comes from the exact same place as when you say you've been to 14 countries. I want to go, hey, I've been to, bam, and I want to tell you how many countries I've been to. But that thought jumps in my mind the second you say it, because I want me to be on display. Right. You know, you tell a story about an interesting thing that happened with kids in Brazil, and I want to jump in and go, I saw this thing, and blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you, you know, because I love me, and I want me on display. And that's true. Like, I mean, I battle this stuff 24 hours a day. If I'm honest what's going on inside my internal dialogue, that shameful dialogue goes on inside me all the time. Because mostly, I'm about me. And I'm about a gospel of me, honestly. And often, Jesus is just a leveraging tool to put me on display. And that's shameful, but that's reality of what's going on inside, and the parts of me I don't want to admit. And so, yeah, man, I think this is a real problem for the church. And one of the great things is, as we move into a post-Christian culture, like what's going on here in Portland, we're not the power structure anymore. We can't pretend that we're in charge. We can't pretend that we're the biggest dog in the pack anymore. We can't. And so we're having to learn some humility out here. We're having to learn to collaborate, to realize that, like mercy ministries, there's a whole lot of people out in this town that are doing mercy ministries for people who do it a whole lot better than we could figure out how to do, because they've been doing it for years and years and years. 80 hours a week, caring for the homeless, for the widow, for the orphan, for the hungry. They do it all the time. And why would we go start something when we could just partner with them with our money, our time, and our talent, and go, we're going to support you because we love you. We love the fact that you stand in the gap for this issue with people that God loves. And so we're going to love you and be present with you, and the gospel will be present because I'm here. And I don't need to force the labels. Does that make sense? And so I think there's a lot there for the church to learn.
I'm going to take that to heart and really pray about it, and I hope that others listening do as well. So guilty of it myself. And like you said, I know that you can tell sometimes when you're conversing with somebody and you're telling them a story, they're not listening, but they're rehearsing their story. Yeah, totally. That they're going to rebuttal with. And I've been guilty of it just the same. On page 176, this is kind of going to be a confession of sorts, I guess, for me. But it really turned on a light for me. It's something that I resonated with, and I didn't even really understand it until I read it on this page. But you had talked about this large dog that had really been beaten down from past experiences, and how, as powerful and strong as he was, he'd been beaten into a mental place of cowarding. And you had a line in there, just separated the page, and it said, I reacted the same way, and like an animal, I cowered and ran. And I went through something. I've never admitted this publicly, but my wife and I were actually doing a church plant, and we got to a place where we had our initial recruitment meeting and got our team together and got people to commit and showed them the vision and the plan. And within a matter of weeks, she and I separated. Wow. And Tony, I ran. I cowered and I ran. I didn't know how to call these people and face them and tell them what happened. And some of these people were some of my dearest friends. Uh-huh. And I turned off Facebook. I turned off everything, and I just went into hiding. And I did not know how to face that. And I didn't even realize that I had been taught that reaction and that it went much deeper, and didn't meditate on it or think about it. I just knew I was embarrassed by it and didn't want to address it, and that it cost me some friends. And you know, some of them got over it and some of them didn't. And I don't blame the ones who didn't. You know, I didn't handle it well, and I didn't act like a good friend. I definitely didn't act like any type of leader or anything by my actions. But, you know, I read that in your book, and I'm so glad that you've been so transparent in this book And it made me realize that I was a coward, that I had some deeper issues that I needed to meditate on and think on. And it goes along the same lines, man. You started off the interview today saying that, yesterday you admitted that you didn't like your wife too much. And here you are coming on a podcast to promote your book. And this is supposed to be your platform where we do lift you up and celebrate this book and try to promote it and put it out there. But you continually are just honest and open. And that, sir, I respect and appreciate. And that is one of the things that I loved about this book so much, because I am a coward and I do have a lot of faults. And it took me watching you admit that you had them to get me to start to deal with them. And, you did it to me again today by admitting that about your marriage. I'm like, if this guy come on here and say he had a bad day in his marriage, why do I keep wearing this mask? It's exhausting. So thank you for putting that in there and liberating me. And I just want to encourage the listeners again, and I know I've said this so many times, I'm telling you, this is one of my favorite books in the last several years, and it has just been challenging to me on so many levels. And I want everybody, I know it's not going to hit everybody the same, but I think a lot of people will really resonate with it and be challenged by it.
Thanks, Scott.
That's my rant. Yeah. Sorry.
That's great.
Well, we've kind of taken the amount of time to make it a good length for a second one. And I guess maybe at the last point I have marked here, we can finish up with this. There's a lot of young ministers I know that listen to this podcast. Not so young, but a good mixture of them. A lot of church planners and friends of mine that are going to ministry. Young people came up through my youth group. And towards the end of the book, you said that when you were around 25 years old, that you really thought you had your faith dialed in. And most people thought you was a good Christian. And you said, unfortunately, I believed them. You thought the religious game was wired. You were on the right team, etc. And I've told this before in preaching that I did a television interview one time on the religious channel, and afterwards a woman that I really respected came up to me and she said, I was telling people about your interview and I was telling them that you were going to be, to watch you, that you were really going to be something special in the kingdom. And I've related that to people that was one of the worst things that's probably ever been told to me because I believed it. It was damaging. I told this story in the last podcast, and this is the note I want you to kind of finish on, but I had a young couple that came up through my youth group that did come over here when I kind of had my crisis of faith, and I told them I was rebuilding from the beginning. They were those people. They were in their 20s. They thought they had it figured out and dialed in, and I really just didn't know how to talk to them. I just kind of shook my head because I thought, with time, you're going to see. You're going to have the experiences and the challenge. You're going to understand where I'm coming from. But I knew they were just too young to kind of get it. So for the listener who's in their 20s or 30s or new to the faith and they really think they've got this dialed in and they know where they're supposed to be going and they're on God's all-star team, they got visions to plant the big church and to take on the world and to be that missionary. I think for that mercenary for Jesus, I think you used the term earlier, and that God's really lucky to have them. Any words of advice on them on how to kind of slow down or to approach it or how to revisit it so they don't maybe have to go through such a bankruptcy that I think you and I have gone through? Or is that just going to be part of God's process?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to hope that for them, Scott. There's part of me. I once had a friend, one of my mentors, say. She said to me, "I will never again go to a church where the pastor has not experienced significant failure." And when she said it to me back when I was probably 27 years old, and I remember going, "What are you talking about? Like we want to look to follow failures." But as I've gotten older, I've realized how the wisdom in that statement that there are certain parts of character that I don't know how we come to without some tough chapters. I just don't. And, the hard thing is when we want to dictate what that's supposed to look like. Right? Every person needs to go through it in this way. They need to have a crisis of faith in this way, or they have to have a failure in ministry in this way or something. God is infinitely creative in how he sort of brings the issues in our life to bear. And so I wouldn't want to dictate the way, but I don't know if I want to talk people out of it. And, when I travel around and talk to young pastors and talk to like college students and stuff, I tell them that 18 to 25-year-olds in human history have had one job. When you look at the history books, and when 18 to 25-year-olds are put on display in the history books, almost every time it's because of revolution. It's because their job is to change the world. That is their job in the human story, is to change the world, to be activists and revolutionaries and poets and protesters. Like, that's their job, is to see the world and run like gangbusters and not kind of be all twisted about the nuances. Like, they're supposed to believe kind of clean and uncluttered, because that's their place in the world. So part of me wants to go, if you're 22 years old and you want to light the world on fire for God, I just want to say, go do it. Don't get overly nuanced right now. Just go pick a freaking adventure that's beyond you and go do it. If that means moving to the other side of the world, then do it. If that means living on the streets with homeless kids, then do it. If that means caring for orphans, then go do it. Like, you go do something that will change the world. God has got people's spiritual story in hand. I'm not the primary character in my own spiritual story. I am not the primary character in my own spiritual story. God is the primary character. So God has got my story figured out, and we'll kind of work through it in time. And now the other side of the coin is I don't think young people should sort of like protect themselves by surrounding themselves with just a bunch of other young, stupid people. Like, find some older mentors who have been beat up a little bit. Hang out with them. Find some people, especially if you're a young white person, like, go find some people who haven't grown up in majority culture, and be friends with them and hear what it's like for them to kind of bang through life for a while. Hear what it's like for them to try and figure out faith, where the power structures aren't bent to them everywhere they go. Like, those are the kinds of people that I would say go be friends with. And find one that's 60 years old, 70 years old. Hang out with that person. Hear their stories, because that'll start to expand the map as they go on these adventures of where those paths might lead. So that's some thoughts I got.
There you go. And that ties in great. That's kind of the question I was talking about earlier when, for the people who haven't traveled, how do they expand, that paradigm and start to see things from another view? So that was a perfect answer. What do you got going on next, Tony? The next book? Yeah.
So manuscripts at the publisher for Aloof. The book's called Aloof. Subtitle is Figuring Out Life with a God Who Hides. And if you think I was honest in Neighbors and Wise Men, wait till you read Aloof.
Oh, wow.
So, really get into sort of my love-hate relationship with God, and the sort of unexpected moments where God feels near, and the long, fitful silences when God is silent and feels distant. So that's the next book, and so I'm kind of waiting to hear back from the publisher on the process with that. That should be out probably next summer, my guess. And then if people, I write a monthly column for Leadership Journal, so they can go to Leadership Journal online, and Twitter at Tony Kriz if they want to track me down that way. So there you go, bud.
All right, and you guys can get the books online. You can get it at Amazon, a wide variety of different places. Anything else that our listening audience could do to help serve and support you, sir?
And you know what? Buy a copy of my book for every single person you know for Christmas. There you go. Let's just go ahead and go.
That's it. Tis the season.
Tis the season to spend money. Fa la 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 la.
All right, Tony, I appreciate your time once again. And I can't wait to get the next book, and we'll definitely have you back on. I want to be one of the first interviews.
All right.
I don't want to come in late like I did on this one. I want to be right up front. I'm going to get it first. I'm going to read it first, and then I'm going to be one of the first interviews. Deal? That's
a deal, buddy. Hey, and if there's ever anything I can do for you, let me know. And I'm going to try and get out there. Seriously.
Yeah, let me know.
All right, I will.
All right.
All right, peace.
Well, that is it for today's interview. I hope that you found that both inspiring and challenging. I know I did. Just talking to Tony, he has more humility, I think, probably in his pinky finger than I possess altogether. I feel like sometimes just in conversation with him that I say selfish things, and then I feel embarrassed about it to a degree, like his humility exposes my pride, and I am in no way complaining about that. I am blessed to have a friend in my life that challenges me in this way. So I hope this interview and his book also does that for you. Thank you again for sticking around. You guys are my favorites. Don't tell the others, but it's you listeners who stay even past the interview with the guest and listen all the way through the episode. You're my favorites, and the others don't get told that, so don't tell them. But until next time, Grapplers Church family, grab a hold of God and don't let go. Start where we left off at part 1, and the next comment I had was actually on page 94, and you got to talking about Trainer John a little bit.
Okay.
And one of the paragraphs there says that after your roller coaster a few years, you went from a triumphant Christian missionary with the sort of spiritual confidence that would have made him proud to a defeated doubter with a dead soul. And then you begin to talk about the wrestling with kind of maybe the ideology that he had placed on you. So according to the once saved, always saved paradigm, he couldn't say that you were lost. Would he say that you had never been truly a Christian? Because, a lot of people will use that argument. Had they truly been one of us, they wouldn't have left. And you kind of ended it with saying that the last couple of years were irrefutable evidence of that fact. You had violently wavered, actually, is what you said. And I think that's a great topic for us to continue on. And I know kind of we've beat this to death, but I think it's why the book resonated with me so much. It's this spiritual bankruptcy is how you kind of coined it in the first part of this interview. So for people who are listening, and I know a lot of us have dealt with this or are dealing with it, we find no bad guess, just bad interviewing skills by me, I guess. But we are getting better, and the best is yet to come, that I am certain of. But I am very grateful that you keep coming back, that you keep sharing it with others. And if you haven't left a review yet, please do so on iTunes. It only takes a minute, but it really helps the show get more exposure to a greater audience. And you probably came here to listen to the story today about my guest and his book. So by leaving a review, you are helping more people discover him and his book. So go do it, please, and get behind him. And speaking of books, I also want to thank all of you so much for purchasing the Wrestling with God book on Amazon Kindle. You helped it reach number 1. Thank you, so kind studio audience. Big thank you also to the Church Planting Podcast for having me on their show last week and interviewing me about the book as well. I love that podcast. It was an honor to be on with those guys. Go listen to that episode if you would. And if you haven't listened to the podcast itself, I suggest you check it out. And if you haven't gotten the book, please stop by Amazon, search in the Kindle store for the title Wrestling with God by Scott Blair, and download your copy. Tony Kriz. And we just continue where we left off last time, talking about his book, Neighbors and Wise Men, Sacred Encounters in a Portland Pub and Other Unexpected Places. Now, you guys know I have raved and raved about this book, but so have a lot of other people. I was looking today, and I see on Amazon that it has earned a 4.5 star, almost a perfect 5-star rating with almost 100 reviews on Amazon. That is impressive. So don't just take my word for it, how great the book is. Go and read on Amazon what everyone else is saying. And you know what? You know what I would like to see for an Amazon review? A big fat 5-star review that says, I discovered about Tony and this book on the Wrestling with God podcast. Or if you don't want to leave the review, shoot him an email and just let him know that the same thing, you found out about him on the podcast. I just want to know that we've truly been a blessing through this guy and that this show has served him well in a good way. So I won't keep you any longer, Grapplers Church fam. Let's grab a hold of God and not let go. Welcome back to the show, Tony. So are you ready to continue with Wrestling with God?
I'm ready.
All right, we'll just... Wrestling with God, episode number 16.
Oh, I turn my headphones up, man. Take out your Bluetooth. We about to take it past the roof. Wrestling with God to find the truth. It's so mind-blowing and the facts are bulletproof. Tune in and connect direct, cause this sets demand respect. We ain't even tripping, the most intriguing podcast on iTunes. Float with the word like a balloon. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back to another episode of the Wrestling with God podcast. I'm Scott Blair, your host, and this is our 16th episode, Sweet 16. So I guess this is the one where I get my driver's license. I do feel like I'm finding my voice a little better and actually having the type of conversations that I set out to have when creating this podcast idea. So maybe I should get some type of permit. I don't know. It's been a big change since the first several episodes for sure, where I was really struggling at learning this podcast stuff. But look at you, Grapplers Church fam. You have stayed with me through the bad episodes. Be today greatly appreciated. And our sponsor for today's show is actually another show from across the pond, from the UK. This show also interviews people, and I've been listening to it, and it is very powerful. And you guys know the Word of God says that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And this show, the Beauty for Ashes talk show with Sade Papula, is all about testimonies of salvation. And I'm telling you, you hear some really incredible and unique stories on this show. It's just very inspiring. So go check out the Beauty for Ashes talk show. Turn it on, sit back, relax like you do when you listen to this show, and find out how each of her guests came to salvation. You can watch it on www.beautyforashestalkshow.tv. What a great idea for a show. Thank you so much for sponsoring this show, Sade. God bless everything that you guys are doing over there, your work. You're doing wonderful things. It's very encouraging and very exciting. And speaking of exciting, today's show is part 2 of my interview with Tony the Beat Poet.